Welcome everyone to our next episode of Policy Drivers. Today we are talking with Adam Greenfield. Adam is an advocate and community organizer whose work focuses on walkability, public space, and community building. He is a City of Austin Pedestrian Advisory Council member and executive director of Streets for All, an organization that promotes block parties, neighborhood street fairs, and car-free public spaces as ways to build happy, safe, and connected communities. Adam also founded Built Curious, which uses walking tours to promote public awareness of the connection between urban design and quality of life. When Adam lets his hair down, he's often walking and bicycling around the countryside or catching up with neighbors on his front porch. So welcome, Adam, to Policy Drivers. We just want to give you the space to add anything else to that great introduction that we gave you, if you want to introduce yourself and just let us know who you are.
No, I think you did a great job there. I'm all about the built environment and how it impacts the choices we make and our quality of life, which is, goes so deep as to be invisible for most people. And it's exciting to have conversations like this and many others that help people take the scales off people's eyes and see things. As I once was completely ignorant about the built environment, and I've had the pleasure to become more educated about it. So I'm excited to be here with you all today.
Yes, we're very excited to have you as well. So we can just jump right in then. We are excited to hear more about your experience in this public policy space and just kind of learn a little more about you. So since a lot of us are getting started into public policy or maybe learning about it, or maybe just excited, maybe one day we'll get involved. What do you wish someone would have told you when you were first getting started into this public policy space?
Oh, well, I think it's just encouragement, really. I guess it's firstly, never give up. Even if you feel very green and very uneducated about the levers of power and the workings of government, you can learn these things, and there are people out there who know this stuff. And it's just the old advice about just keep going, and if you're persistent, you will triumph. And sometimes the path leads you in directions that you didn't necessarily plan at the outset, but as long as you have the right heart and are open to learning and keep going, you will triumph. I think one of the big things that helps me as well is to try and have projects that facilitate a mixture of short-term victories and longer-term victories, because some of the things that we work on can take years, or in some cases decades, to manifest. And I think if your first project off the bat is something that's going to manifest in 20 years, that just might be tough for you. And I think getting an appetite for the taste of success with smaller projects as well as working on big ones, I think is very helpful. So I've been, I try and have small projects that maybe take weeks or maybe months to manifest. Or, frankly, going out and knocking on your neighbors' doors and saying hello to them is something you can do today. So in some cases, you can actually manifest great things this very day, and by the end of the day, pat yourself on the back for the good work that you've done.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, especially in terms of community and living in neighborhoods. I think that's something that we kind of miss when a lot of people are moving different places and they're like, oh, we're going to be in a new neighborhood later anyways. And so there's not as much as a community involvement as there, I think, could have been, or as there has been in the past. But maybe this pandemic is kind of bringing that back. Have you seen that actually during these interesting Corona times, that there's been more maybe community engagement or community involvement?
Yeah, I think, when times are good, we can be a little lackadaisical and kind of pay our way through life and make up for the things that we're missing that way. But I think when things are getting tougher and leaner as they are today, we need each other more. And My neighbors and I have a sing-along that we do every day at 6 p.m. where we come outside and keep plenty of distance from each other and wear face masks. And every day someone picks a song to sing. And we've now been doing this for about 120 days in a row. At this point, I don't know how we can ever stop doing it. I don't know how we can ever break the chain once you get up to 120 days. And just that 5-10 minutes of coming outside and seeing the neighbors and singing a song together can sometimes make your whole day. You know, if you've been inside all day and you're feeling a little pent up or you're a little worried about things, just a bit of social contact goes a long, long way. And, you know, let us not forget, we had a loneliness epidemic before the pandemic. And it's worse now. For some people, it's much, much worse. And so we do need each other, and there are very simple ways to do that. So we have this amazing resource around us called our neighbors, and I think we have only just begun to see how valuable that is at times like this.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I hope that if there's hopefully many good things that come out of this, that will be one of them, where we kind of open our eyes a little bit more and pay attention to those around us. That would be my
hope. I hope so.
So as we are talking about, there's a lot of differences right now in the policy space, maybe than there was when you kind of got interested, or when you were growing up, there were different things that you noticed in the policy space than there are now. So what do you think is the best advice for people coming into the field now, or even in the next couple months or years? I know we've kind of lightly touched on that earlier, but what would maybe be differences or some advice that you would give others coming in now?
I'd say firstly, read around the subject that you're interested in. You know, I think if you're passionate about it, you will just want to eat up the good books out there. You'll want to read the blogs and the news websites. I think in the access/mobility world that many of us are in, you know, we have fantastic resources like Streets Blog, City Lab, that just are almost daily, in some cases daily updates on what's going on. And just reading around and getting to know the sphere will imbue you knowledge with the terms and the current trends of thinking and that kind of thing. And, you know, I'm not shy in admitting that almost nothing I've ever won or nothing I've ever pushed for was my idea. I mean, we often remix things and make things our own a little bit, but it's often sort of you learn what else is going out there, and then you say, well, that's got to happen here. That would be great. So you make it happen. You know, I can't stress the importance of being a likable person in the field you're in. People just want to work with you if you smile and are funny and laugh, or whatever you can do. Just be a nice person, and that, I'd say, is 90% of the impact you can have. Is just someone, you know, people look forward to seeing you, and even if it's just you're a window on a Zoom call, if that window has a smile and is a nice person, then it goes a long way. And I would start there and just move forward, and then, you know, see what are the organizations in town, what's the action going on. Eventually you get a sense of the lay of the land and what organizations do what and how you can get involved. And, you know, it's a little, we have a little more restrictive environment now with the pandemic and less in-person meetings, but you can still connect. And all of the organizations who work in the fields that we're talking about, they're always looking for more help and more people to get involved. So you will be warmly received, I'm sure, wherever you go.
I get that strength in numbers for sure.
Definitely.
Well, what kind of book recommendations would you give our listeners then? You mentioned that it's really good to kind of get into that policy space you're interested in. So what would be some of your favorites that you've read?
Oh Lord, in the access mobility
yes.
world?
I think so.
Um, let's see. Walkable City by Jeff Speck. Um, uh, Cities for People by Jan Gale. Um, Human Transit by Jarrett Walker. You know, a Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander is an older book, but an absolute classic and something you can just dip into at any point in the book and take away little gems of knowledge. The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, early 1960s book, but still very relevant and beautifully written. Those are some of my favorites.
Awesome.
There's so many. I mean, just there's so many out there, but those are some good ones.
We need a reading list for the pandemic, so this is great.
We'll have the policy nerds.
Do you know the story, Adam, that when I met with James Bass, the CEO of TxDOT, I handed him Walkable City and said, "Here, you need to read this." So, who knows?
All right. I hope he threw it in his car.
Yeah.
And then walked from his car to his house, of course. But yeah, no, there's great stuff out there, and a lot of my thinking. I mean, the Built Curious urban design walking towards largely came from Cities for People by Jan Gale, with a little bit of Christopher Alexander and Jane Jacobs mixed in there as well. So getting out on the street and walking around and applying this stuff that you're learning is very important. And that's one of the really cool things about this particular subject is you can walk outside and your classroom is right out there. And, eventually you can join the rest of us in getting highly worked up about curb cuts and slopes and pedestrian hybrid beacons and other things.
Wonderful. Well, those are some great recommendations for our policy nerds that are listening in, and even for us too. And maybe Jay, you haven't read some of those, so maybe you've read them all. So that could be fun for you too, maybe.
I'm sure Jay has read many things that I have not.
I know, I'm sure.
Every day.
So kind of onto work in policy versus in a nonprofit. How would you say working on policy in a nonprofit is different from working in policy in any other role? What would you say are disadvantages and what are the advantages there?
Well, certainly in a nonprofit, you often have a board to answer to. There are more people you have to get on board with your agenda. As an individual, you can, if you choose, say whatever you want and do whatever you want. But being part of a group of people, a nonprofit or otherwise, is a longer term game. You get to use the name recognition of your organization. You get to use the existing connections that your organization has. And I think it's a great way to go, usually, to join an organization. And this landscape is constantly changing, so there's always room for new ideas, and every organization has a certain degree of inertia to it that fresh thinking and new energy can help with. In the last couple of years, there's been, at least in my awareness, there's been a big shift about in the transportation sector, for example, towards focusing on accessing things rather than getting to places really quickly, which is a crucial distinction. And, that's a new way of thinking that is less siloed than how do we get a bus or a car or a bike or a person on foot from A to B as quickly as possible, and integrates land use and other elements. And so, helping to bring new thinking and new ideas into existing organizations can be very, very powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And to that, about like the accessibility versus speed and amount of time taking to get there, how do you think are kind of this is my perception of our society. It's very much a society ingrained in loving convenience. So how do you think that kind of society thinking is going to affect this kind of accessibility side of transportation versus the I want to get there as fast as possible?
Well, it's funny because if we are indeed a society that prizes convenience, we've actually, I think, gone totally. And actually, the way we've developed is incredibly inconvenient. Let's say you want to do some errands and you want to go to a hardware store and a grocery store and the post office. Sometimes you have to A, own a car, which is very expensive, and operate one. And B, you actually have to get to all these places, which because of our zoning and land use practices are often distributed miles apart from each other around town. And in the process, bump into anyone, and you're often having a fairly unpleasant experience on a feeder road or a highway to do these things. It's just a very, very inaccessible, difficult way to do things. And for the sidewalk next to I-35, and it's not something I look forward to. So I think you can definitely make the convenience point to argue for, you know, land use reform, for people living closer to each other, for commercial areas to be sprinkled around the city, and to give more space to transportation that moves more people per square foot, such as buses and walking and trains. So I think we have built the worst possible environment when it comes to convenience. And
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if anyone watching this are more walkable when people live close together, I think they're often struck by, you can leave my apartment and walk to a grocery store. Very convenient.
Yes,
Let's have some more of that.
I lived in Germany for 2 years. There they go. Yeah, I always bring this up, but I had like a grocery store. There was a butcher. There was like there were probably 3 or 4 grocery stores within like 5 minutes walking my house. And I had my bike, and I loved riding public transportation. And so it's just so interesting how we have, and hearing you say this, I'm seeing it in a whole different light too. It's like what the convenience in the United States is really inconvenience, and in other areas, it's just so interesting how we've kind of redefined this word of convenience.
Definitely. And you know, dense walkable areas are a very, in some ways, are a very American thing as well. We don't have to go overseas to see this. If you go to a lot of small towns that have retained their historic cores, then you have, you know, some of the key cities like New York, Boston, Seattle, San Francisco, and many more. So there's lots of this as well. And you know, many cities, Austin has areas that are more walkable, that have destinations that are close to each other. So you can get that experience here too. And that's one of the things that we experience on the walking tour, is that the kinds of places that we're talking about that Austin needs more of, Austin itself has. We just need it outside of the downtown core. Yes,
absolutely. So you're already opening our eyes to some great ideas that we should get more out to the public. So hopefully, I'm optimistic. Mm-hmm. That's an actually great segue into what you think some of your biggest victories have been, and like what you're most proud of, not only in like your personal involvement in this space, but also just like what you've witnessed here in Austin, or maybe in other communities that you've been involved in or lived in.
Yeah. Well, for me, the greatest victories are always the coalition building ones, the ones that bring new organizations, new businesses, new members of the public into the fold, because then you're building a movement and you're building capacity for greater change still. There are things that you can accomplish by yourself or with a small group of other people, and those are those can be significant victories. But to have someone else say, you know, I want to give my time to this thing that you're working on and I want to join you is very, very powerful. And there are two of you. For me, that's always the next frontier. So it's the difficult thing is how you do that. A couple of years ago, BikeAustin and WalkAustin, which I'm on the boards of both, collaborated on winning multimodal improvements along Shoal Creek Boulevard, which is a 5-mile north-south artery in Austin between northern Austin and central Austin. And we got creative to build that capacity. And one of the things that we did, very simple, this was when people could enter businesses, every business freely, and stay there, is we just put petitions in every business that we could think of in the area. And every couple of months, we would come through and harvest those signatures. So, you know, we got, you know, we put a couple in Juice Land, for example, or several cafes and bakeries and bike shops. So we were able to collect support from people that had no prior exposure to this field before, and bring them onto our mailing list, and some of them further than that. And that's really exciting to do that. And it's, you know, then it's a lot of work, but it's developing the relationships with those people. So if someone shows an interest in, say, I want to speak at city council about this, or I want to send an email to my council member, they've elevated themselves as someone who's interested in getting involved. So you thank them and you reach out to them again, and you show them that they're valued, and you know, it's a lot of relationship building. So all of the things I'm most proud of are along those lines. The other thing, you know, I mean, the recent victory that WalkAustin, BikeAustin, Farm&City, many other organizations had with getting the city to adopt the Healthy Streets program, I think was really a great project. And that was actually one of those quick win projects that give you energy for the longer term projects that are so critical. But it was, you know, we saw that things had changed with the pandemic, and suddenly there was this urgent need, which I would argue has always been there, but is now more obvious, that people need streets to function for a broader variety of people and a broader array of uses. Streets used to be social spaces, and in the 20th century, they became just about moving through, and generally moving through for people in cars and not for anybody else. And suddenly we have this elevated need for streets to function for other things as well, like getting exercise so people can stay healthy during these difficult times. But what's been really nice about that as the program rolls out, with the balance of the streets are changing, so that people walking and biking and using a mobility assisted device are more on an equal footing to people in a car. People in cars are still welcome on those streets, but so are more people. And so when you change the infrastructure, you change the behavior and the experiences of people within it. So of course it's powerful to change your own lifestyle. You are one person. If you can change the environment in some way, and that's what's so exciting about policy, as opposed to a personal lifestyle decision that you personally make, is that policy is the operating code that permeates into many lives. And so if you get that right, then you can have huge impacts beyond anything you personally could ever do. So those are some examples of some recent exciting things.
Well, that's wonderful. And that's just, it's really exciting, because that's absolutely what we need, is something that permeates through to lots of relevant spaces and to people. So it's absolutely some wonderful wisdom and great victories that we all should be striving for, I think.
I wanted So
Yeah, go ahead,
I wanted to
Madeline.
follow up about one of the things you said about how streets used to be social places and how that has changed. Um, you've said a few times in different contexts that you have a passion for community building, and some of your organizations organize events like street fairs or block parties, or just general improvements to public spaces that make people want to exist in them a little bit more often. So how do these types of events, do you think, build into this larger goal, and what makes you so passionate about organizing them?
So the question is how do the events build into the larger goal of community building?
Well, how do community building events sort of improve our public spaces and build a base for some of the improvements that we want to see?
Well, using streets as social spaces creates a civic fabric that facilitates everything else. The good ideas and the good alliances in societies are formed by people coming together in some way. And that's small everyday people bumping into each other that provides a certain fabric of society that's incredibly powerful. And Jane Jacobs talks about this very eloquently in the Death and Life of Great American Cities, about the sidewalk ballet and how that's much more powerful in creating and maintaining a stable society than institutions, for example. So really a street event is a pilot for a public space. And so you create this space where people can come together. There's a great cartoon out there that a lot of people in our field have seen, and it's of some people walking down the sidewalk, and then instead of the usual road surface, there's just a big chasm in the middle of the street. I don't know if some of you have seen that, but it's making the point that space is inaccessible to you. It's public space, but you kind of forget it's there because you can't go there because it's too dangerous. And that is a very, very radically different situation than we had 100 years ago. And so a street event is taking us back to a timeless situation where public space was about moving, but it was also about facilitating connections between people. The question is, you know, what do events mean after the event is over? Certainly you've brought people together that day and they know each other's faces, and that can have lasting impacts moving forward. But there's also the question of, could that space have some kind of longer term change that would facilitate greater contact on an ongoing basis? And I think one of the exciting developments in the last couple of years and going back decades before that is we're learning different ways to do that. And some streets, you can do a kind of healthy streets treatment where you put barricades across half the street so everyone can get through, but they have to wiggle a little bit, and just having to do the wiggle is a rebalancing that turns the street into a shared street at a relatively small cost. So that can be one way of doing things, or you can have a wound earth treatment, which is a shared street where you're making the whole roadway one level and you're putting bricks and basketball courts and plants out. And that's kind of a step up from the healthy streets treatment, but much more expensive, but perhaps more rebalanced and more permanent and more pleasant. And then you have full pedestrianization, which is, you know, maybe only applicable, if at all, to a small number of streets. But most cities around the world have a place where you can go and there are no cars, other than perhaps deliveries in the morning. And anyone visiting the towns will instantly go to those places. They are the de facto centers of the areas that they're located in. And I would argue that every good city has a place like that. It doesn't belong everywhere, but it is an important component. So, and then, you know, in other places, we just need, you know, we also badly need sidewalks and bike lanes. And there are some streets that are going to continue to function, at least for the foreseeable future, as more places for movement. But right now, all they favor are people in cars. So there's a whole spectrum, and every street has its own particular appropriate treatment and path forward.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere about how streets used to be for pedestrians, and it was more common to have people in the road than it was cars, and that might have been a product of less people having cars at that time in history. But at some point, the car lobbyists won out, and they made it illegal for people to be in the streets. And so I really like your idea of kind of like reclaiming that space as a space for not just cars, but also people, and making that a safer thing to do now that we have really fast motorized cars. So I think that's really awesome. And I wanted to ask you about Built Curious, which you founded. Can you tell us more about this organization and kind of what inspired you to create it, and what's been your favorite event or experience?
Well, Built Curious is a interactive experience. It's a walking experience where you go out with a small group of people and you walk around, and the facilitator, who's usually me, just points out various things related to the built environment that people might not have thought about, and how that influences the decisions we make. And that can be how close a building comes up to the sidewalk, the distances between buildings, how wide the road is, how tall the buildings are relative to the width of the road, how many doors and windows you pass on the street, what the design speed of the street is versus the posted speed, all these kinds of things. I remember one of the walks we did on South Congress. It was really pretty amazing to introduce the concept of induced demand to people who were older and people who were younger. And you know, it's a very simple idea that if you widen or narrow roads, you influence how people choose to move around, and you're not dealing with the same quantity. Whenever you change geometry, you change behavior. And this is such a cool concept for decision making when it comes to how we allocate space, whether we widen highways, whether we put in bus lanes, bike lanes, train lines, that kind of thing. And I remember standing opposite Home Slice Pizza on South Congress and explaining the concept of induced demand. And people could look at the roadway right there, this quite wide road, and you could see the light bulbs go off in their head. And that was a really exciting moment for me. So it's fantastic. I love that experience. And you could literally do a Built Curious walk anywhere, anywhere you can go, in any city, any town. The concepts can be applied. So it's really exciting.
Have you found that that's a way of like hooking people and bringing them sort of more into this field of consciousness? Like, oh, these are things that I've never thought about, and now I want to know more about that. Like, has it served to be kind of like a also like a community building experience for widening your audience?
That's always the dream, and I'd like to continue moving more in that direction. It's a shame that the pandemic makes it difficult to do these kinds of things now. Maybe not more than 2 or 3 people before your line of people is 20 feet long.
Right.
But yeah, certainly. I mean, there's I think scalability limitations with a walking tour like that. I think beyond about groups of 7, people will stop talking and engaging. There's something about 7 people that beyond which people will start kind of not talking that much. So, you know, the challenge with these concepts like induced demand, which are so crucial to decision making in this field, is a lot of people have the intuitive belief that, for example, widening a road will ease traffic congestion, which is the sort of one barrier to driving that people generally experience, or a lot of people generally experience. And we can't bring all of them on a walking tour and educate them that way about induced demand. So there's a huge public education task with these ideas, and that's something that some of us are talking about these days. Is there some way to do it through the internet that makes it fun, where people can really get this? Because I think the more people who get it, the more people are going to see what we really need to do. And what we need to do is very different from what is being proposed in many cases and what we've done in the past.
I have a controversial question. I'm going to bring up a controversial subject, which is
bring it on.
Yeah, the land development code in Austin. I know you just briefly mentioned like setbacks and height requirements, all of those things influencing the feel of the streetscape that you're in. So I was wondering if you had any hopes or visions for the way that the new land development code is going to either manifest or maybe not manifest. If you just want to maybe give some of your opinions or your hopes for that process.
The land development code will be updated at some point. It will. We will not have the current land development code for all time. It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
And you know, the current conversation has been delayed a number of times for various reasons. And right now, of course, it's been delayed for another very good reason, which is this pandemic that we're in. But it's very difficult to know whether all these delays are ultimately a good thing or a bad thing, because the pandemic has shifted people's perception of the world around them in a quite profound way. So many people are walking and biking. And then we've also had this, you know, the huge protests around Black Lives Matter and the conversations around equity. And more people are starting to discover the origins of single family zoning, and how that is one of the most powerful tools of exclusion that you can possibly apply to an area. And you know, the book The Color of Law, maybe I should have mentioned that earlier, is a great exploration of this issue. And I think just there's been a renewed focus on equity and inclusion in everything. And now it's a question that comes up in every conversation and every field. And it would be interesting to put this argument, if they haven't already heard it, before every Austin City Council member, and hear how they could justify continuing a single family housing zoning policy anywhere, knowing the impacts it has, and in many cases why it was instituted in the first place. And we're seeing those kinds of sentiments and those conversations happening in other cities. I think it is gonna, I wonder if Austin's, the land development code we eventually come up with will be better off for some of the consciousness raising that's happened this year. So we'll have to see, but you know, right now there's a lot of other things going on that are very time sensitive in regard to November and the election, and initiatives getting on the ballot. So I'm not sure when we'll hear from the land development code again, but it, you know, hopefully in the relatively near future. And I hope it will be better off for the conversations and the new awareness that many people have developed in 2020.
Yeah, I hope so too. I've been looking out for houses that have Black Lives Matter signs and Code Next is back signs, so that I know who to talk to first.
Yeah.
Because they've got part of the way there, so we can make it the rest of the way if we've already got that background.
And I think when people have the Code Next sign with the wrecking ball in their front yard, that's just where they're at right now. And I think that there's very understandable reasons why people are wary of change. There's just a human tendency to fear it. There's also the fact that a lot of new construction is low quality and doesn't fit in with its surroundings from a design point of view. And I think people are understandably nervous that they're going to have more of that where they live. And then there's also just, most people have no background in land development policy and understanding a little bit of the history of single family zoning and even setbacks and other core issues, I think can be very powerful. A lot of people just don't know this stuff. So it's just a challenge to get the word out to that many people. But that's part of the work. And frankly, even with Austin City Council members, there's a lot of education to be done with some of these basic concepts. So we definitely have to think about our decision makers and how they don't always know as much as you think they might know about issues. They have to think about a lot of things in their job. And the people watching this, it's not that hard for you to know more about an issue than most city council members when you really drill into it. And they benefit from that. Austin City Council has benefited a lot from the work that Farm&City has done in many policy areas. And it's just, it's a reminder of why a policy focused organization like Farm&City could be so powerful. You might not see direct results quickly, but the end result is so profound as to permeate many, many lives. So that's why it's so important to work on these things.
Well, I think maybe jumping off from just a brief opportunity for our viewers to sort of explore our town some more, I'm actually taking a transportation and policy class or planning and policy course in the fall, and it seems like one of my assignments is going to be walk around different neighborhoods in Austin and observe the pedestrian and biking infrastructure. So if you have any suggestions, both for me to have a more successful assignment or for any of our viewers who want to get a better idea of, let's call it the good, the bad, and the ugly around Austin, are there any places that you would suggest checking out to sort of observe the differences in pedestrian infrastructure?
Just choose places that are interesting to you and walk around them and have a look. Choose a variety of environments. Go for some downtown core locations. Go to some kind of more inner ring locations. Choose a grid-based neighborhood. Choose a dendritic-based system with its loops and feeders and cul-de-sacs. And I'd say the one book is Cities for People by Jan Gehl is just a great exploration of how relationships between the different elements of the built environment and the distances as well matter so much. So one of the ways that I've relieved stress during this stressful year is to choose an area of town and I ride my bike out there and just walk around that neighborhood, I realized until recently that there are a lot of neighborhoods that I had been through many times, but had never actually walked around. And I was shocked to go over to these neighborhoods and walk around them and just realize there was so much there that I had not experienced before, because I have certain routes I always take. And it's a great way to spend time, and it's fun, and it's very revealing. And keep your eyes open for how many people are out there and what types of people. I always call children the indicator species of a great city. The more children you see on the street, the more that your environment is created well for all people. Children being among the more vulnerable of the population. So keep a lookout for children. You see more of them out and about these days than you used to here. I've loved seeing children riding their bikes on Austin streets without adults. And that is a sign of a good thing. You know, some people might think that's a shocking thing, but until recently that was normal. Parents let their kids out for the day and the kids disappeared off and came back in the evening, and the parents had no idea where they'd been. And that's how the children developed a lot of their skills that helped them into adulthood. So
Awesome, thank you.
There's, you know, sometimes people say a lot of Austin isn't walkable, and I wouldn't say all of Austin is pleasant to walk, but the vast majority of it you can actually walk, and you can always get something out of it. And there's a lot of Austin that is really quite nice to walk around, actually. And I've been having a great time doing that. So count your blessings.
Thank you very much. I will definitely look out for some places.
Maybe we can all the interns, once everything's over, we can take a little walk and stroll around neighborhoods in Austin. That would be a fun little activity.
Yeah.
Well, so we want to be respectful of your time, but this has been so wonderful getting to talk to you today. And I feel like we've learned some really valuable advice and just stories from you. And we're really glad that we've been able to spend this time talking with you this late morning. So I want to give you kind of the last word. If there's any last words of wisdom or anything that you want to share, I want to give you that time.
Well, I just want to, I really enjoyed this conversation, and it was really interesting for me too. And this is just such a fascinating, exciting area to be involved with. You know, everybody uses streets, everybody exists in the built environment, and it is a core, fundamental way to improve life for everybody. And you can start by putting a bench outside your house so people walking by can sit. You can influence policy. You can go for a walk around a neighborhood. You can sign a petition. You can like a comment on social media. There's a lot of things that you can do, big and small, fun and not so fun, but all very important. And it's just, you know, for somewhere like Austin, there's so much good to do. There's so much to work on, and there will be for the rest of our lives. And I think that that's a really exciting thing. And once you see the good that you envision actually manifest in some way, it's just an amazing experience. So yeah, I just encourage everyone watching this to do something and to enjoy the fruits of your labors.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.